And welcome into Notre Dame on the Voice of College Football Network. It is looking a little bit different as I am your host now, Patrick Previty. I'm taking over for Mark Rogers. Sorry for the pump fake there with the countdown, but we are back and we are in business right now. Mark Rogers is obviously the head of everything here at the Voice of College Football Network. He has moved on to the big show, to the national YouTube channel. So if you want to still have content from him, obviously continue to follow him there and subscribe to that channel. But he has laid the foundation for me to be the new host and the channel leader for you guys. So hopefully you stick around and I end up becoming the guy that you guys love to see talking about Notre Dame football, Notre Dame news, what's going on in recruiting, and hopefully we can all talk, build a nice community here on this channel. But obviously it's going to be a little bit of a process, and I am here now to potentially facilitate that. So I did have a couple things here now. The banner is going to show what we're talking about in today's show and what we're going to be going over as far as Notre Dame football. But I did want to start out with who exactly am I? I'm Patrick Previty, and what are my credentials of being a host here for you guys on Notre Dame? Well, obviously grew up a Notre Dame fan. I think that is a prerequisite to being on this channel and to be talking Notre Dame football with you guys. It's a little bit different than some of the other people that might be talking about Notre Dame football. A lot of people don't appreciate and grow up with this team, and that was kind of what I've done. Now you can also add me to the list and to the pile of fans that did not attend Notre Dame but are fans of Notre Dame. I am in that group, and I am a proud member of that group. Now I do reside and I'm from the University of Central Florida and the area here in Orlando, but obviously bleed the blue and the gold and the shamrock and everything of that sort. So I'm in sports production, in sports media, and at this point have now gotten a chance to cover Notre Dame, and I just had to hop on it as soon as I possibly can, and that's exactly why I'm here. I'm going to try to do it to the best of my ability. In other aspects of media, I'm also a sideline reporter on ESPN Plus. I cover Big 12 games, a lot of smaller collegiate sports, and I'm also a writer for Athlon Sports. I'm covering 3 different college teams as well as a team in the NFL. So I have some sports media experience, and we're going to be keeping the ball rolling, keeping everything moving as far as today, and we're talking about Notre Dame football. Now that is who I am. Now let's get into the 2024-2025 season recap. Now, this is the first episode actually on this channel, the first video on this channel since the national championship game, which is pretty huge because that's still something big time to talk about, even though it was almost like 2 weeks ago almost. But before we get into exactly what happened in that Ohio State Notre Dame game, I did want to talk about my own opinion and perspective on the season as a whole. So let's take it back all the way to the Northern Illinois loss that Notre Dame suffered. I think we're all thinking at that point in time, this Notre Dame team cannot get into the playoffs, even at an expanded 12-team playoffs, if they lose to Northern Illinois in the second week of the season, right? Because you're automatically assuming that this team is going to have one extra loss along the way. There's no way that they can run the table. And if they lose to Northern Illinois, well, there's no way that they can run the table because they're not that good, right? We're all thinking, dang, we maybe whiffed on another transfer quarterback, and the time is ticking for Marcus Freeman and the boys, and you're kind of at a little bit of a rock bottom. And Northern Illinois is everybody's sweethearts that week, and from just a plain football perspective, you couldn't get anything done on offense. From my perspective, I was out. I was like, oh my God, I cannot believe that this season has crumbled before us, and we're not going to be able to make any sort of run at the 12-team playoff because we lost to Northern Illinois. Well, that obviously wasn't the case. This team ran the table. They looked good. They looked better, and it was kind of in the same vein that Ohio State lost to Michigan almost, if you give me that one, that this team kind of turned everything around, and it showed the culture that Marcus Freeman built as well as just the heart and the fight that this team had. When Northern Illinois beat them, well, Notre Dame came right back and played pretty well, and they hung a ton of points on Purdue and ton of points on a ton of different other teams and took care of their ACC schedule, and they got right back into it. That was what was really great. I don't think that this team makes it with 2 losses, and I think maybe in other years, if there's a really, really tough schedule for Notre Dame, maybe they do make it with 2 losses, but not often. And we know that without a conference championship game, and we know that because some years the schedule doesn't pan out to being really, really good for this team or not good enough. But that was just the way that it happened. Northern Illinois beat us, and this team turned everything around and was able to get to the playoffs. Now, I did want to talk about each playoff game specifically. We'll start with the Indiana one. Leading up to that game, I think there was a lot of buzz around Cignetti, his confidence / cockiness. And I think it was, hey, can Notre Dame get the monkey off their back? Can they finally win one of these games? I mean, this wasn't the big one, but it was like the game leading up to the big one. And it's like, oh, well, shoot, if you can't even win the first round of a 12-team playoff, I don't care if it's on the road. It's Indiana, man. Like, you got to be able to take care of business. They're a good team, but look at who they've played. You've out-recruited them. You have the culture. You have the fan base. You have the history. You need to take care of business and win this game. And they were favored in that game. They were favored by a touchdown. And that actually was kind of a lot of pressure on this team, even though this wasn't the big game. Well, leading up to it, I thought that Notre Dame was going to cover. I was very confident in their defense, and I knew that Indiana just did not look good against Ohio State, and that was the nail in their coffin. They just weren't that upper echelon. They were still at that point a year away. They had a lot of transfer guys come in who didn't start at their school. They had a lot of guys from Miami who didn't start at Miami, and they just weren't able to hang with Notre Dame. Notre Dame took care of them on the line of scrimmage. Cignetti and those boys just weren't as aggressive as they probably should have been until very late in the game when it was already out of reach. And Notre Dame had, Jeremiah Love had an amazing rush that pretty much carried the offense for the entire game, at least statistically. And Notre Dame took care of business. I thought that they were going to cover. They did. They took care of business, won that handily. I think that was the point in the season where you could say whatever you want. You could have said, hey, this team isn't going anywhere with that Northern Illinois loss. There were a lot of people. They're gone now. They're not showing themselves who said, that Indiana was going to win that game. But we saw a lot of the doubters kind of go away. Everybody was like quiet now. The Cignetti, everybody was kind of also against Cignetti. And I think that helped a little bit of the Notre Dame, the public on Notre Dame, right? They were like, oh, like this team that I've always hated, since I was a kid. Like, well, they beat that really annoying coach, right? So that was huge. And I think a lot of the doubters and a lot of the public opinion ended up swinging into Notre Dame's favor. Now, going into the Georgia game, this was huge because it honestly, from my perspective, this is where I do deviate, I think, from some of the Notre Dame public, where I was like, whoa, a lot of the media is picking Notre Dame to beat Georgia. I mean, I know that Carson Beck, is out, but I mean, Gunnar Stockton isn't that bad, right? He looked pretty decent against Texas. I get statistically wasn't all that great, but they still won that game against Texas. I'm thinking, well, like, hold on. Like, can we slow down a little bit? Like, I like this Notre Dame team, but the line of scrimmage won't be as dominant of as they were against Indiana. I need to see more from Riley Leonard. I know he's going to have to pass the ball, and like, how much better can we be than a Gunnar Stockton-led Georgia team? And that they won the middle eight in that game. Gunnar Stockton, the one play that he would love to have back is the strip sack at the very end of the half. And Marcus Freeman coached a very good game, and Notre Dame took care of business. And they look like the team that brought it to Georgia, right? That was almost like a magical facing of demons for anybody who's been watching Notre Dame for the last 10, 15 years, maybe even longer, right? Where you just, wow, we're pummeling an SEC team on the line at the line of scrimmage. And it's kind of been like that for the last handful of years, but to really see it all come to fruition and Georgia just not be able to enforce any type of will on Notre Dame was huge. And obviously maybe that game is slightly different if Carson Beck is there, but Carson Beck now transferred and not coming back to Georgia. So that might just tell you just about as much as you need to know about that. And also at the same time that Georgia won a lot of games in spite of Carson Beck. So real win, line of scrimmage, pummeling. And as a pessimistic Notre Dame fan, I'll take it. We're happily moving on to the next round now against Penn State. Leading into that game against Penn State, I think we're all thinking, like, from a college football perspective, oh my God, this 12-team playoff is insane. What is going on is just so different than we've ever seen in college football, right? There's so much argument about who should be in, who should have been out, all this other stuff. Well, the bowl season has now figured itself out too by this point, well beyond this point. And now we're about to either have Penn State or Notre Dame in the national championship game. I mean, we're all looking at each other like, man, is this real? We knew Notre Dame had the ability to do it, but that, like, if you had told us this in week 2, probably shaking our head thinking like, man, there's no shot that is even in the ballpark of possibility. Well, it ended up being it. And the big MVP of that game, Steve Angeli, kept the team alive when there was nothing going on in the first half offensively. And they were able to take advantage of some turnovers from Penn State and were able to run the ball when necessary, and were able to just pull out a close game. If you'd asked me what I thought before that game, I'm thinking Penn State's a much improved team as well. They may have beaten Boise State, they may have beaten SMU, and you may not respect those wins, but they're still here. And you could almost say the same thing about Notre Dame up to that point. They're both here and they're ready. And I'm thinking it's probably a borderline coin flip. This is going to be close. I don't think they're going to blow. Either team are going to blow each other out. But then Notre Dame was able to get the turnovers that were necessary, and they were able to pull that game out. And I think that was one of the other games where we saw the skill position players really rise to the occasion. The wide receiver group really were able to make some plays down the stretch of that game, and things just started exploding and looking really good. And when Riley Leonard was able to come back out onto the field and play, I mean, I don't know if he had a concussion or not. I'm not going to speculate too much on that, but the guy got, his head knocked off and was able to come back out after Steve Angeli bought this team an extra half and was able to make the necessary throws. That was what was so huge about that Penn State game, and was something that I think also bought this Notre Dame team a lot of credibility. So now moving into the Ohio State game, 12 minutes in here now, we're going to be talking about the Ohio State game. Thank you so much for even just sticking around for that, but here we go. So leading up into the Ohio State game, I think, a lot of Notre Dame fans are thinking this camp is not going to be like 2012, right? Because this team is just different. Line of scrimmage is way different. Brian Kelly also in the rear view mirror. This Notre Dame team they're going to have a shot against this Ohio State team. It just so happens that Ohio State is just a completely different team from when they played Michigan. It also just so happens that they have an amazing offense that is just otherworldly and only seems to get stopped by their own play calling mistakes. And they're also probably the hottest team in college football, even with Notre Dame like winning and running the table since the second game of the season against NIU. Ohio State was on a different level, just a different level going into this game. I think that's pretty much just often recognized, especially whenever you look at the way that game turned out. But leading into the game, 8.5-point dogs, no matter what, depending on where you took it. You'd think Notre Dame's going to have to win this game. They're going to have to get the rushing game going. Riley Leonard's going to have to make some plays. And this Notre Dame defense is going to have to just be strong on strong, strength on strength in this game. They're going to have to say, we're going to end up making the necessary stops against this Ohio State offense, and we're going to give our own offense some chances in this game to make some plays and make things happen. And for the first half, that was not the case for this defense. That defense got wrecked in that first half, unfortunately. And I think that kind of really cemented what ended up happening at the very beginning of the third quarter, which was Marcus Freeman call on a fake punt at our own territory. And unfortunately, the defense just not being able to have as much confidence in that first opening drive when Ohio State had their very first big play, huge play of the game when they had that huge run all the way down the goal line. That was really unfortunate. I think that this offense didn't give them enough leeway in that first half outside of that opening drive. We knew that Riley Leonard wasn't going to be able to carry the ball 9 times every single drive for the rest of the game. And there was a certain point right when he was on pace for 36 carries in the game. That wasn't going to be the game plan, but it was surely a security blanket. Wasn't enough. When we look at that offense in the first half, I think we're thinking, wow, if we didn't have that penalty on the opening drive and then just the poor or on the second drive, I believe, if I can remember correctly, and then the second drive after the touchdown was the mishap on the snap that ended up hitting the guy in motion. And if you don't have those huge setbacks on those drives, maybe you end up having the ball for a little longer and you can give your defense some time off the field and some time to just prevent the Ohio State offense from having so much momentum. That unfortunately was not the case. And, it showed. And as you got into the second half, being down 31-7 after that fake punt call, now it's time to score on every single drive for the rest of the game. And I think that honestly brought Notre Dame into a bit more of an aggressive mode, which was perhaps needed, but we didn't really see that offense in the second half or in the first half outside of that opening drive, which I thought was a real disservice to this team and to some of the skill position players on the outside. But I can't blame anybody for it. I mean, you mess up on 2 plays, destroys those drives, and then the defense gives up the touchdowns. Ohio State was better in that first half, especially after getting punched in the mouth on that opening drive. I mean, what a response, right, from Ohio State to score on the next 4 possessions or on the next 5 possessions, 4 touchdowns, 1 field goal after giving up, a 10-minute plus drive on that opening on that opening possession, that's huge on Ohio State. That shows almost more about Ohio State than it does Notre Dame. But I digress from that. The one decision I did disagree with, as I mentioned just a second ago, was the Marcus Freeman fake punt call. It was kind of executed pretty much just as what you needed. It was just dropped towards the sideline, which is kind of unfortunate because it's one of those play calls where I think you just you hold your breath and you're getting ready to say that it's a bad play call when it doesn't work. And if it does work, you're like, all right, well, I'm not the coach. I'm just the guy sitting, watching the game. So I'll just let it happen and on to the next play of the drive because we're down 7-31 or 7-28 at this point. We just gave up. We haven't stopped them from a touchdown the entire game. So we're just going to let it happen. But it was just unfortunate that the very first stop for Notre Dame of the game was when the offense gave the defense, or excuse me, when the offense gave the other team the ball on their own 30. So they still got points out of it, which I felt was like slightly demoralizing. But 7-31, as I mentioned, now you have to score for the rest of the game. And I felt like this Notre Dame team kind of just still was really, really good, still really patient. And I think, unfortunately, the Marcus Freeman call for the field goal was the right call. I do think you weren't going to. I didn't think you were going to win that game down 16 by scoring 2 touchdowns and two point conversions. I just felt like that wasn't possible at the time of the field goal. I believe they took that field goal with like 11 minutes to go in the fourth, maybe like 9 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. I just figured you were going to get the ball back 3 times, and honestly, maybe this game would have looked a little different if he had hit that field goal. But fast forward now. 31-23. You just weren't able to get a stop on third down. Jeremiah Smith, too good. They kicked that field goal, and now it extends it to a 2-possession game, ball game over. But what a comeback. I'm not taking a moral victory in the national championship game, but obviously a really, really good, gritty comeback and avoided at 7-31, those flashbacks from 2012, or at least, even if you weren't a fan who had flashbacks, because I think we just appreciate this season so much more than like back then. It was just going to prevent any sort of media scrutiny where it just tears down everything that this season meant and what it was, right? Which was so nice, at least a relief, right? That we had a shot, one play away, one stop away, and then you're thinking we get the ball back. Shoot, we got the most momentum. It's all about momentum. We got more momentum than any other team in this game or in any other team in the playoffs, honestly, at this point, because, they were down and out. But that's what I was thinking. That was my perspective on the national championship game. Obviously, would have loved to win it, but this season was insane. And if you had told us after the NIU loss they were going to get to the national championship game, I probably would have told you're crazy. I mean, I saw that game with my own eyes. I'm like, this team isn't. I don't know. We might just not have it. And also, even if you win against NIU, maybe you still lose some games. But let's head over to the next topic. Let's talk about the Senior Bowl. Guys, I covered this independently, a little bit for the Voice of College Football Network, but also just generally and for myself, just to go and see who out there was any good. Let's talk about the Notre Dame players. Let's talk about who raised their stock. Let's go with Riley Leonard first. This quarterback draft is very interesting. Slightly top heavy with Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. I don't think people would put them as far as the top 2 quarterbacks relative to the others in recent years, as in, competitive. I don't think that they would say that those 2 guys are usually in the top 2 in other drafts, but that's just the way it is. And it's potentially generally thought to be a thin quarterback draft. I think that what I saw from Riley Leonard wasn't exactly something that separated himself from the rest of the pack. As I mentioned, Sanders and Cam Ward are the leaders in the clubhouse. They did not attend the Senior Bowl. They didn't really need to. Sanders was at the Shrine Bowl. And I didn't really think that this week separated himself from the middle of the pack guys, because I didn't think anybody separated this week. I felt like when I went and I was watching the individual practices, it was somebody had a good day on one day, and then the next day looked average, and then it was just switching off as far as who that guy was the entire week. Felt like Dylan Gabriel won the first day, on the national team, and then I felt like Jackson Dart had some good throws as the week went on, and then I just never really felt like Riley Leonard separated himself in practice, but I thought he had a good game. And then conversely, I thought that Jalen Milroe didn't have a good game, but I felt like he was pretty sharp at some of the practices. So I just felt like it was just a lot of jockeying for position, and it's really going to come down to what some of the scouts actually believe really matters. And I just didn't really think that Riley Leonard separated himself like obviously from the other people. But like I said, I thought he had a really good game. 6 of 7. He started for the American team, which had a little bit of a logjam at quarterback. They had Jackson Dart and Jalen Milroe. He got the starting nod in the Senior Bowl game and was 6 of 7 and for 54 yards, had a scramble for 2 yards and a sack of 8. He started in the first 2 drives. They didn't score on those drives. They weren't his fault exactly. I believe there was a false start and a negative rush too on one of the drives. So at the end of the day, it wasn't going to be all on Riley Leonard's shoulders that they didn't score at the very first part of the game, but he looked pretty good, had a nice deep ball, had a really nice slant pass on a 3rd and 12, if I can remember correctly. And I just felt like in that game, he played well. But throughout the week, I didn't think that he separated himself from the others. But Riley Leonard's going to be a name to watch. Maybe he tries to lean more into the passing game as far as like what he can do through the air and tries to avoid the running aspect of his game. Like I'm talking, maybe he'll only run a 40 at his pro day. I don't know. It just depends on what he exactly wants to do and how he wants to market himself to these scouts. But felt like he was good this week. Just didn't separate. Jack Kaiser. These are the 2 players I'm going to touch on because the defensive line was dominant the entire week. But Jack Kaiser was voted by the position groups of his own team as the linebacker of the week for the American squad. So running backs and the defensive linemen and I believe the offensive linemen of the American vote on the linebacker of the week, just as a couple of position groups would vote for the most valuable player in another position group. Jack Kaiser got his for his own position group from the other oh man, how many times can I say position groups? But you get the point, right? From the others on his own team. Really nice honors. And that did show. His pass coverage was elite. I wanted to share a quote from a NFL scout, Matt Miller. He said, every time I watch linebackers, Jack Kaiser is making a play in coverage. That was the truth. I mean, it wasn't perfect, and I'll get into that in just a second, but he honestly played so well. And I think turned a lot of heads. 1 week after the national championship game, this guy's coming through, and he's or like a week and a half or something like that. I don't know, but he's coming in and no rest, and he's playing some really good football, and he's answering a lot of questions. And I think a lot of teams like that. And just as in last year, we saw a linebacker from Notre Dame rise up the draft boards after maybe not being so high. Jack Kaiser's doing the same exact thing. I felt like he was a real riser in the Senior Bowl among everybody, not just, generally watching the Notre Dame players. I felt like among everybody, Jack Kaiser rose. Now, I did get into a little bit just a second ago. He wasn't perfect. Well, he wasn't perfect because he was going against RJ Harvey. And I can tell you guys from a UCF Orlando perspective, RJ Harvey is a beast. Him and Jack Kaiser went after it all week. They each said that the other player was who was pushing them to be a better player on the football field. I thought that was so great. So Jack Kaiser was like, look, the one guy who's making me better on the American team in these practices is RJ Harvey. And I can tell you guys from, if you're not unfamiliar with who that is, he is a guy who can actually play at the NFL. And they were going after it day in and day out. They were looking so just competitive towards each other. RJ Harvey won some reps, other reps won by Jack Kaiser, and I think they both improved their draft stock. Really, really great, underrated rivalry that happened this week at the Senior Bowl. RJ Harvey threw a touchdown pass, I believe, actually in the game as well. So awesome stuff to see, and I really do think Jack Kaiser raised his draft stock. Now, as far as the defensive lineman, Jim Nagy said at the very beginning of the week, he's the guy who puts everything together for the Senior Bowl, that one of the strongest position groups in the Senior Bowl was the defensive lineman. That was the truth. Let me tell you, this defensive line dominated the offensive line every day of the week. Now, the actual game threw off some of the quarterbacks, obviously sacked Riley Leonard, and I believe Jackson Dart was under a major amount of duress. But we're not talking about the national team. We're talking about the American team, and because that's where everybody from Notre Dame was on. But that entire defensive line won. They were all risers, including our very own. So that was something that I thought was really interesting, something to keep an eye on. Of course, the defensive line was huge. Going into it, we knew it, and they all rose to the occasion. Moving into Coach Talk. This is the 2025 Offseason Kickoff show. We're going to be getting more into what's going on with the coaching staff and what's going on in the winter transfer portal as it just recently closed in upcoming videos throughout this week. But I did want to touch on what is going on with the exodus as far as the coaching staff is concerned. Obviously, we all know that Al Golden left for the same exact position. He's now the defensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals, and that is one of the most unfortunate things. Do you think we have an OSU problem? Depressed Notre Dame fan. Well, I'm so sorry that you're so depressed. Do I like an Ohio State problem? I don't know. I think that's an unfortunate thing that we lost to them, but I don't think we have an issue too much. But I will say, as far as like, I think we have an issue with all of the staffers leaving right now, but I don't think it would be too big of a deal for this team as it goes on, because I think Marcus Freeman's built such a culture. But Al Golden leaving, Chad Bowen, Mike Moon, Zaire Turner, all also leaving. There was another staffer poached, Michael Bearden, headed to the Cleveland Browns to join Tommy Rees's staff. A ton of guys are leaving. Ton of guys going, in the Midwest-ish area of the NFL. I think that we'll see exactly what these guys end up doing in the NFL. But I think under Marcus Freeman, a lot of guys are probably potentially looking a little bit better than what we think. But huge, huge names obviously leaving. But the other week, on February 1st, Notre Dame officially announced the hiring of Chris Ash as the new defensive coordinator. He has a national championship with Ohio State back in 2014, and his recent positions being the Jags and the Raiders. Marcus Freeman said that he will be crucial to player development, player personnel, and that was part of the reason why they brought him in. I think that is probably what is almost a prerequisite to any sort of coach that you try to bring in. And so that's really great that we're trying to facilitate the replacement of some of these big name guys who are leaving the program. And, you're going to see that over time, ironically, right? With the team having really good seasons, you're going to see, unfortunately, you'd like to think that they would stay, but no, they're going to go just the way that it happens in college football and go to other schools. And unfortunately, now the NFL, which if it comes calling, is going to usually get answered, and they're going to go. But huge replacement nonetheless, and could potentially be really good for this Notre Dame Fighting Irish program, that they continue to replace some of the coaches that are leaving with viable candidates, viable guys. Now, Tommy Rees being the offensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns, I mean, he could be one offensive season away from being the head coach of the Cleveland Browns, just the way that it goes as far as like the hiring of head coaches go, right? Like when a head coach, when an offensive coordinator has a really good game or a really good season in the NFL, he's probably going to get at least a couple interviews. And with the dumpster fire that is the Cleveland Browns, if they have a rookie QB or something like that, and he ends up having a really good season, you could end up just completely resetting your career for a different trajectory than you might even think is possible at that point. Plus, he's 32 years old, so you're thinking, well, shoot, he's a young guy. That's the kind of person that we want to hire for the offense. Reese's terrible play calls, I don't blame you, honestly. I don't know how he would potentially be a head coach in the NFL, but he has risen up to that point. I don't really think I remember like when he was here, I always got frustrated with. I just felt like the easy way to describe the way that he called plays was that he was creative or was some sort of like cutting edge. But I always felt like there was a ceiling to what we did with him. And I don't know. I mean, shoot, he's now the offensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns. Like I said, one good season as the offensive coordinator will get you a head coaching job in the NFL. Like it really will. We saw it with Canales. I mean, obviously he's the quarterback whisperer back in Seattle, but maybe one or two stops that can got to get you there. And Cleveland's a dumpster fire in a sense too. So they might end up with like a rookie QB, and if he does well, you never know. I mean, Cliff Kingsbury's getting a lot of buzz, or was with Jaden Daniels, and it's just the way that it goes in the NFL. But I agree. I mean, I'm surprised too. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Kellen Moore, where you're always thinking like, how is this guy like maybe he's kind of creative. He's got that quarterback background, but you're kind of always expecting a little bit more from them as coaches. That's just my own opinion. That's really bordering on the opinion based from myself, but I always feel like you kind of want a little bit more from those guys. I mean, that's just my opinion. But if he becomes the head coach of the Cleveland Browns, we could definitely see him poaching more guys, I'd imagine. Yeah, probably. But we'll end up having to see. That could be maybe further down the line, and maybe it never ends up coming to fruition. But I wanted to end today's live stream on the portal. The winter transfer portal just closed, and I think Notre Dame did a pretty decent job. I did also want to talk about some of the departures. Pat Coogan left, went to Indiana, did not go to Michigan. Huge deal there that he didn't choose Michigan. Jaden Thomas went to Virginia. Deion Colsey went to the University of Miami of Ohio. Ty Washington comes in at tight end. We'll see exactly how the tight end room ends up like playing out. I mean, obviously we got some guys returning as well in that room, and there's huge shoes to fill, but I don't really think that that's going to be a point of weakness for us. I think Notre Dame's tight end you. So, I think that they're just going to be okay at that position no matter what. And more than okay, I should say. That's, to be exact. But Rocco Spindler also ended up leaving. I think that some of these offensive line departures just show how much depth that we have. We have depth on the defensive line and the offensive line, and I think that that's pretty obvious as far as some of the guys that are leaving. And I mean, I don't really see it as an indictment on, we're not using talent properly. I just think it's just a log jam. It's just a log jam there, and we're going to keep re up with great guys. And obviously the recruiting is going well too. So we'll get into more of that as the week goes on, and I'll be making specific videos on the portal, what's going on with the coaching staff. But I did also just want to get on here and talk about the 2024-25 season, introduce myself. The Senior Bowl just passed. We'll end up tracking some of those guys as they go through the NFL draft. But yeah, it's been really fun talking Notre Dame football with you guys. It'll be at this time every single Monday. Today we started at 6:15, had a bit of a pump fake at the very beginning of the stream. But usually we'll start right at 6 every single Monday. That'll be what time we go. I'm the new host, taking over for Mark as he has built the foundation and let me continue on the legacy. But thank you guys so much for watching this stream, joining on in. It's been a good time just talking Notre Dame football, and I will see you guys live at this same time, 6 o'clock next Monday, and also parts of the week on pre-recorded videos on certain topics. But that's all I have for you guys today. Go Irish.